I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Today, I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and earlier, Paulina had a chance to talk to Dr. Johnny Hunt. Now, he's the pastor of the First Baptist Church there in Woodstock, Georgia, but he's authored several books, one of which is called Bedtime Devotions, and helping your children to have a devotional time. So let's join Paulina and Dr. Hunt.
Our guest today, Dr. Johnny Hunt, is a speaker, a conference leader, and author, and also the senior pastor at a First Baptist Church in Woodstock, Georgia. And today we're talking about his latest book, the daily devotional for kids, Bedtime Devotions with Jesus. Dr. Hunt, welcome to the program. Good to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a real privilege to be with you.
Please tell us about your new book, The Devotional for Kids. What's so unique about it?
Well, I've been doing devotions for adults for the last 7 years, but after thinking back through the years and realizing that when my children were small, we basically had our family devotion book, which sort of was owned by us. We felt like we were the possessors, and we would read, and as the children got older, allow them to read and ask questions. But we thought it would be really neat to write something on the child's level and let them take possession of it. And as Isaiah teaches, and a child shall lead them, and hopefully it somewhat be their influence with their children with their parents, is how much they love the devotion and what they're learning themselves as well as being taught by their parents.
Now, the devotional you put together, from what I understand, it has different writings from pastors from all over the country, right?
Exactly. We have had a lot of pastor friends that enjoyed being involved in a writing project, which many times had never written at all, along with my wife and both my daughters. And many times the pastors chose to let their wives write, or even their children's pastor. And so it's been really neat to see so many people involved. It allowed us to put more concentration on the shorter project as opposed to having such a long writing project of coming up with 52 different subjects to write on over the next 52 weeks.
Well, you turned it into a very beautiful book. And one of the first topic that you're talking about is forgiveness. And I wanted to ask your take on that, and why do you think it's so important to talk to your kids about forgiveness?
Well, we simply believe that the greatest single need in their life will be that one day in their life to experience God's forgiveness. And then for the rest of their life, they'll be granting to others what they've received so freely from God. I think about every day in my life, certainly every week, I find myself in a time of confession where I'm asking God's forgiveness. And then there's always those that we offend, whether we intended to or not, that we're asking, hey, didn't mean to say it that way, shouldn't have said it at all, would you please forgive me? So it is a lifelong principle and promise and teaching that all of us have got to embrace.
When you are teaching your children about forgiveness, or in your pastoral ministry, what are the challenges that you have when you talk to kids about forgiveness, forgiving others, so maybe asking for forgiveness? What are the challenging areas, and how can you help parents with those?
Well, normally because you're dealing so much in emotion. For instance, my daughter comes home from school. She's a second grader. She talks about someone at school that treated her wrongly or pushed her or talked behind her back. And she's ready for me to either call her parents, call the teacher, do something to straighten it out. And then you begin to sit down and say, well, let's think through this. I wonder how Jesus would have us to respond. And now we make it more about them and a principle in life we're going to teach them, as opposed to getting even. And oftentimes they begin to say, well, wait just a moment. I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I need forgiveness? And then you help them to realize that when Jesus took our blame upon himself on the cross, he had done nothing wrong, ever. And yet he bore our penalty for what we had done wrong. And so it gives us a wonderful opportunity to speak of God's unconditional love, his forgiveness. And then keeping in mind, too, Jesus talked about the fact that he would forgive us based on how we were willing to forgive others. So if we want to continue to be in this relationship, we're going to have to forgive others, even as we so desire God's forgiveness in our life.
Looks like a good lesson for adults, going through those steps, because sometimes we are so quick to judge and to do things irrationally without, and I think this prayer book can be really good for adults. But I want to ask you, what can adults learn from children when in their prayer lives?
Well, most of the people that are sending us emails or posts about the process they're going through with their kids, many of them are saying, first of all, you've written in such simple, concrete terms. I'm learning some principles that I believe I missed myself in my own Bible study. And then secondly, the principles that the parents are teaching their children are oftentimes the very principle they'll have to practice the next day. And so I've found that whatever I read, somewhere in the week, I'm going to be confronted with the very thing that I've studied, or especially that I've taught others. So now I have to make a choice. Am I going to respond the way I've encouraged my child to respond? Which one of the great needs in the Christian life is not just how we encourage them to embrace truth, but how we emulate truth. Are we living this truth out as well? So it's a great help for mom and dad as well as for our sons and daughters.
What would be your advice to a parent who's maybe a little bit terrified of the summer, because now they have the kids to themselves and they have to figure out not only what to do, but how to keep their faith alive and to keep them focused through this fun summer months? What's your advice for parents for the next few months?
Well, I think about how basically every night that child's going to be going to bed, and if they've really thus far really enjoyed their time of study and they love reading their devotional book, it's hopefully there on their nightstand. And when the parents tuck that child in that night, hopefully, they're going to say, I can't go to sleep before I read. Gets back again to that child leading them. And then we're going to be involved in that which we really, really value. Regardless of whether it's summer, busy time in our life, we learn to prioritize around the things we value the most. I think about what Paul said to Timothy when he made reference to Timothy's mother and grandmother, Lois and Eunice, and how they had taught him the scriptures since he was a child, which was able to make them wise unto salvation. When a parent begins to realize that what I'm going to do in these few moments tonight is not just about time, it's about eternity, that ought to really add the needed value to prioritize that special time with their children.
Dr. Hunt, there are a lot of broken homes, a lot of children that are hurting. Is there something in your devotional that might help fill that void and show them that there is a Heavenly Father that cares for them, regardless of whether they have a father in their life?
Yeah, I think that the reason it will be great to help them is we deal with the major issues. It's almost like if you look carefully in the weeks of the devotion, it's really the same themes, taking them from a different approach. Dealing with things such as pride, dealing with the unconditional love of God, dealing with God's forgiveness and God's peace and the different characteristics of God, how he makes himself available. That becomes strength for the single mom or the single dad, as well as for the child. I think they're learning together, really, and I believe they're also encouraging one another in the principles. How wonderful it'd be for the parent to be so honest to say, well, tonight we're dealing with a subject that mommy struggles with or daddy struggles with. So we can learn this principle together. And then there's a prayer there and a takeaway that can be so much help for both the parent and the child.
In your pastoral life, you've ministered obviously to adults and children. Do any of the questions that kids ask you stand out to you right now? Can you share maybe some stories from your ministering experience?
Yeah, I really can. It's amazing. We'll get a call every now and then when somebody's reading a devotion and they just say, I've just got to share this with you now. We got a call recently And the child said, Mommy, this book is helping us so much. I think we ought to go to Pastor Johnny's house right now and tell him how much it's meant. And said, we just can't just go show up at his house. And they said, oh, but Mommy, he lives at the church. He and God both live there. They stay there all the time. And so for that young mind, they formulated the belief that since they always see me at church, that's where I live. And it gives them an opportunity to say, no, he lives at home, and God doesn't live at the church either. God's here with us right now. He lives in our heart. It becomes his home when we trust him. And so it gives you wonderful opportunity to explain truth just simply by the questions or the thoughts that the children are having as they read and make their way through the devotion.
How do you explain tragedies to children, like what we see in the news? How do you tell them why and what's happening to people who love God?
Well, it's apparent that sin has affected us all, and brokenness is a part of all of our lives. And so to be able to say to a child, there's a lot we really don't understand, but one thing we know, the Bible teaches that God never changes, that God never leaves us. And what a promise that he's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. I will never leave you, never forsake you. So we're not sure about what will happen in our lifetime, but we are sure of this principle and this promise. God will be with us. And I think that's one of the great principles you read and learn in the Psalms. And so hopefully this just becomes sort of a starter, if you will, to introduce the children to the Word of God, where they take it as their own personal possession, but then evidently, hopefully, gives them a hunger in going forward, where they will begin to read the Proverbs every day or a Psalm every day and begin to learn more about the nature and the characteristic of God.
I hope so, Dr. Hunt. And thank you so much for putting this book together. Again, Dr. Johnny Hunt, Bedtime Devotions with Jesus is available, I would assume, everywhere. It's a beautiful book, beautiful illustrations. And like we mentioned earlier, it has writings from pastors from different states and churches. So it really is a wonderful collection of very inspiring thoughts. Dr. Hunt, thank you for being with us, and God bless you and your church.
Thank you, Paulina, and God bless you as well.
All right, great. Hey, coming up next, we have been watching in the news, what happens if Greece can't pay their bills? Whoa. Well, we got one of the experts to help us with that coming up next here on Focus Today.